being a quantum phenomena, it's similar to light. What is the nature of light? In physics, they discovered, sometimes it'll manifest as a wave, other times as a particle. It depends how it's observed. The same thing with Wetiko. It's in what's called the superposition of states, in that, like transparencies that are overlaid on each other, it contains the highest evil, and the source of that evil, and it contains not only its own vaccine and its own medicine, but it actually is potentially catalyzing us to wake up and to remember who we are. And both of those are encoded within the Wetiko mind virus. And how Wetiko manifests, will it take us down and kill us, or will it help us to wake up? That depends on us, because Wetiko, it's this revelation. It's a living revelation. It's revealing something to us, and it's this revelation through the dark.
Hi, I'm Ricky Deriz. Welcome to episode 55 of the Mind That Ego podcast. Paul Levy is a creative artist, a pioneer in the field of spiritual emergence, and a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner for more than 35 years. He is the founder of the Awaken in the Dream community and the author of several books, including The Quantum Revelation and Undreaming Wetiko. Our conversation dives into the murky depths of the so-called mind virus popularized by Indigenous author Jack Forbes, who in his book Columbus and Other Cannibals refers to Wetiko as the sickness of exploitation. Paul is a gifted oracle whose description of subtle and hidden forces of Wetiko illuminates how the mind virus influences our world, relationships, and inner processes. Together, we explore how quantum reality mirrors a waking dream and how the universe communicates through symbols. Paul also shares profound insights on awakening from mass hypnosis, the dangers of totalitarian psychosis, and the weaponization of technology. Plus, why critical thinking and our creative spirit is the ultimate superpower in undreaming Wetiko and navigating these turbulent times. Just a reminder before we jump into the conversation to please like, rate, subscribe, and share to help more people access the podcast. Paul, a warm welcome to the Mind That Ego podcast. I'm really excited to talk with you about Wetiko, having read your book, Undreaming Wetiko, that my friend Nick recommended to me. It really is a lucid description of a lot of the unseen, unconscious dynamics playing out in the world today. I'd like us to jump straight in and begin with the question, what is Wetiko?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start off by saying, so it's a Native American term. I had been tracking this thing, but didn't have the name for it. And then I came across, in Native American tradition, they had this word, they call it the Wetiko. They think about it like a mind virus, and it's like a cannibalizing spirit. And in a way, it's the source of all the evil that's playing out both individually, relationally, and collectively on the world stage. And, it's so I've been studying it, and I've written 3 books about it, and it's, there's no doubt. I mean, it's the diagnosis of what's actually of the malady that our species is playing out in the world, in which we're just destroying ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's also no doubt it's at the bottom. It's at the very root of the collective madness and the evil that's being played out and acted out in the world. And when people hear about a mind virus, it can trigger people and it can sound new agey or woo-woo, but all that it really means, and it's a no-brainer, is that the source and the solution of the collective madness that we're playing out is to be found within the psyche. And, like, where else in the world could our, collective madness be found? And so the thing about Wetiko, see, it's an inner disease of the soul, but it's invisible to, ordinary perception, because it's the lens through which we view our world. And what I'm doing is trying to shed light on how it covertly operates, both out in the world, because it configures actual external events in the world so as to express itself, but it's non-local, which means it also, in a sort of hidden way, acts itself out via our unconscious reactions. Mm-hmm. So it actually informs and acts itself out through the projective tendencies of the mind, because we're always projecting onto the waking ink blot and interpreting things a certain way, placing meaning. And Wetiko, one way to conceive of it is that that's the channel, the projective tendencies of our minds, our unconscious blind spots that it operates through, because it's a form of blindness. And it's a form of psychic blindness, but it's a very peculiar form of blindness in that it actually thinks of itself, somebody who's under its spell, as being sighted. And not only that, when you're under the blindness of Wetiko, not only are you not aware you're blind and you think you're sighted, but you actually conceive of yourself as having better sight than people who actually see. So in a way, just because I could go on and on, just in a nutshell, with Wetiko, we've entranced ourselves. We've literally hypnotized ourselves via the creative genius of our own mind. And this is our status as a species right now. But one final thing, Wetiko, I point out, it's a quantum phenomenon. What I mean by that, and I can talk a little bit later about how, quantum physics is actually offering us the medicine for Wetiko. But by being a quantum phenomena, it's similar to light. What is the nature of light? In physics, they discovered, sometimes it'll manifest as a wave, other times as a particle. It depends how it's observed. The same thing with Wetiko. It's in what's called the superposition of states, in that, like transparencies that are overlaid on each other, it contains the highest evil and the source of that evil. And it contains not only its own vaccine and its own medicine, but it actually is potentially catalyzing us to wake up and to remember who we are. And both of those are encoded within the Wetiko mind virus. And how Wetiko manifests, will it take us down and kill us, or will it help us to wake up? That depends on us, because Wetiko, it's this revelation. It's a living revelation. It's revealing something to us. And it's this revelation through the dark. It's not like 2,000 years ago, Christ coming from the heavens on a beam of light type of thing. No, this is a revelation of what's most important for us to know. And it's coming through matter, through the darkness, through the unconscious, and through evil. And if we don't recognize what's being revealed to us, then we're fated to continue to, kill ourselves. But if we have the revelation, if we have the recognition of what's being revealed, then we actually can access our creative genius. And that's where we can really change things for the better.
Beautifully said. Thank you. And you mentioned within that, there are implications for the worldview that support Wetiko as a mind virus. And you mentioned the world or the cosmos as a psyche in some sense. How would you link that worldview, or a supportive worldview that shows that interplay between the psychic and the material?
Yeah. Well, in a way, this is what quantum physics has discovered. Maybe we'll just get right into, because I wrote a whole book on quantum physics, and the new version is coming out soon because I've had more downloads. But, I made reference to quantum physics is offering us the medicine for Wetiko. And here's how. Before quantum physics came on the scene, scientists thought that the world existed objectively separate from themselves, and they were just studying the world, trying to understand how the world operated. And then quantum physics came into the world 100 years ago or so, and into our minds. And it empirically proved that, the idea of an objective world is just that. It's just an idea in our heads with no correlate in reality, that the act of observing this universe actually influences the universe that we're observing, which is to say the act of observation is creative. And what that means, this is like proving that consciousness is not separate from seeming physical reality. And, and another way of saying that, because you see, people who study quantum physics, I don't know anybody who disagrees with, the statement that all physicists make, as far as I know, that, it's the greatest discovery ever in all of history. in the realm of science. That there's no debate about. What the controversy, because it's very controversial, is what does it mean? And I'm pointing out, and they're also saying, these cutting edge quantum physicists, that, we haven't found the essential idea of what it means. And when we discover that, it's going to be so simple. And it's like we're going to be saying to ourselves, how could we have been so blind? Now, I'm not a physicist at all, but I'm saying quantum physics is showing us that we're having a collective dream. And in a dream is nothing other than psyche. The matter of the dream, the forms of the dream are inseparable from the awareness of the dreamer. It's all one. And so quantum physics has proven that there's no like separate things like matter and consciousness that are interacting, or objects that are interacting, or separate cells that are interacting. No, that quantum physics has proven, because people think it's like all about the really small. Yeah, it's about the really small, and quantum physics has discovered that our universe is quantum through and through on all scales, from the micro through the macro. And quantum physics is basically saying, yeah, there's no separate parts interacting. It's a seamlessly interconnected whole. Mind and matter are not separate. This totally connects with depth psychology, the work of Jung, where he brings to light his idea of synchronicity. And, and I've written a lot about that in my work, but it's all of these wisdom traditions are converging, pointing out that what we conceived of as being matter, and I think of Jung says it's a big assumption. We assume that matter exists on its own, but we only know of matter as images in our psyche. And that's so obvious that we miss it. So the idea is that, these seeming opposites of matter and mind more and more are being seen as not just co-joined but inseparably united on a deeper quantum dimension. And that's profound, because that's pointing at the incredible creative agency and power that we have in our own, just each one of us. Because part of the spell is that, we're so helpless and there's nothing we can do, and people fall into despair. But that's the propaganda. That's the lie, Anyway, so I could just say a lot more about that, but I'll stop there for a moment.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I like, exploring this and going into the quantum quite early on, because, I think this worldview, the supportive worldview of psyche and matter being influential, is so integral to Wetiko and how that plays out. And you mentioned the creative genius. It's really hard to conceive from that traditional materialist view of reality how something like Wetiko can play out in our lives, also on the global stage. Through that process of creation, the interconnection between psyche and matter, and the way that we, in some sense, manifest our reality. How do you view it that Wetiko interferes? How does it kind of create that distortion in our seeing?
Yeah. Well, on the one hand, and I can go into this, there's the psychological dynamic of projecting the shadow, and then we become entranced thinking the shadow exists out there. And that's something I would like to go into, but even before I go into that, I wanted to say, like, one way of really understanding what I'm pointing at is via the imagination. Okay. And just imagine you're in a night dream. And you're in a night dream, and what is a night dream? But it's simply just this reflection of your mind, of your deeper mind. So in the night dream, you're actually inside of your psyche. The psyche isn't just contained in the skull, but in the night dream, this universe you're in, this dream universe, is nothing other than mind, is nothing other than psyche. And if you're holding a viewpoint in that night dream, the night dream has no choice but to reflect back and give you all the evidence confirming your viewpoint, because the night dream is nothing other than a projection of your mind. So say, for example, you're holding a viewpoint that this universe you're in is objective and separate and solid from you. Being a dream, right? The dream will shapeshift and instantaneously give you confirmation of your viewpoint. So the world in the dream will manifest as if it's objective and solid and separate. And think about what I'm describing. You now have evidence confirming your viewpoint that the world is objective and separate from you. And then by doing that, you get more entrenched in your viewpoint, more fixed in your viewpoint. And the more fixed in your viewpoint, the more the dream, which is just a reflection of your viewpoint, will just give you all the proof and evidence and confirming the truth of your viewpoint ad infinitum in a self-reinforcing feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm describing, you have actually hypnotized yourself by your
Mm-hmm.
own creative genius.
Yeah.
That's the way Wetiko works. You see, it plugs in. It has no creativity at all, but it's a master impersonator. The apocryphal text calls it the counterfeiting spirit. It puts you on. It puts you on like a suit of clothes where you unconsciously identify with its version of yourselves, and it fools you. And but it has no creativity, so it plugs into your unconscious creativity, turning it against you and serving its sinister ends. And this is why one of the major cures, you could say, for Wetiko is to access your creative spirit and be creative and express yourself creatively. Mm-hmm. Because if you don't do that, then Wetiko will actually plug in into your unconscious creativity and turn it against you.
Yeah. But with because you mentioned the shadow as well, and the aspect of projecting from the shadow. Please do. Yeah, I think that's really important.
Yeah, because I was just going to say that. It's great that you picked that up, because like one way to think about the shadow, the unconscious sort of darker. Also, it can be light. There can be like the golden shadow that mm-hmm. we're so happy to project onto this guru or that swami or whatever. But it's typically thought of as like the negative, aspect of ourselves that we like to keep hidden. And one way of really understanding it is to once again invoke the creative imagination. Imagine you're in a dream and you're not connected consciously with your own shadow, with your own darkness. Well, what happens? You actually try to exterminate it. You try to get rid of it by projecting it outside of yourself in the dream, and being that the dream is just a reflection of your inner process. Into the dream will walk a character or a group of people who will carry your shadow, who will embody your very disassociated, split off, and projected shadow. They will then embody it. And now you have evidence. Oh, the evil really is out there, and then when you do that, you become even more entrenched in the identity of, oh, I'm just good and love and light, and the dark is out there. And when you amplify that process, what do? You ultimately guaranteed will try to destroy the person who's carrying your shadow. And, by doing that, guess what? You've become possessed by the very evil you're trying to destroy. But what do? You are actually enacting unconsciously in the outer world in trying to exterminate your shadow out there. You're actually enacting the very inner process, which is at the beginning of projecting your shadow in the first place, because you wanted to exterminate your own darkness. Now your inner process is playing itself out in the outer world. And that's the psychological dynamic, the shadow projection, scapegoating. In his work, he called shadow projection the lie. Who's the liar? It's the devil. The idea is that shadow projection is itself the acting out of our darkness, the acting out of our shadow. And so that's really the way, I think it's helpful to understand that. And it's so obvious. It's getting played out all over the world where, fill in the blank, if you're identified with the Republicans, the Democrats are the bad ones, or vice versa, or Putin's like Hitler, or Trump's like Hitler, or Biden's like, whatever. It's just, you can just fill in the blank of who you're projecting the shadow onto. And then that creates this fertile field for Wetiko to just act itself out.
Something that comes to mind, and I know for a lot of people, maybe less familiar with the shadow and the integration of the shadow and how that plays out, and the process of getting to know your inner darkness. Sometimes I find there can be a disconnect when you share the reality of projection with someone, and then they say, but there's no way that, it's one way or the other, there's no way that my inner darkness is murderous, is evil, or goes to the extreme of what they may see in the world. Or it could be that there's a fear. Wait, does that mean that if I have a lot of hatred towards someone like Hitler, I've got an inner Hitler in my shadow, kind of waiting in the wings? How
Mhm.
would you kind of reassure, or how would you encourage someone in that space to almost bridge that disconnect of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's not so literal, right? It's not just
Well,
a like
here's
for
the thing.
like.
So a couple thoughts come up. One is in his work, Jung talks about that we all have the statistic criminal inside of us. And
Hmm.
what he means that under the right circumstances, we can act out our shadow in a way, that's criminal, that actually crosses the line, that any of us have that in potential. But then, as you were, whatever posing the question, I thought of myself where how I discovered Wetiko is in my personal life, in my family, and the story's not important, but it was my father who actually was taken over by Wetiko, and it destroyed the entire family. I haven't had a family for over 20 years. It almost killed me. It destroyed my mother. It was, and I was fortunate enough to have the recognition that, oh, this is a revelation. Something is being shown to me, as it was just like totally ravaging my entire family. But how come I bring this up is, for years I've been contemplating my father, and he was just taken over by evil. And whenever it got reflected back to him, he just doubled down. And then the whole non-local field protected him, protected the abuser in a way that just blew me away. And that's when I began to recognize something is being revealed. But the point is, over the years, I've discovered in myself, I'm just like my father.
Mm.
I don't like act out in the way he does, or, just murderous rages, or like in total destruction or hatred or whatever. But the same essence, the same potential core is there in me.
Yeah.
And I see myself acting it out, not theoretically, but acting it out in very subtle, way more benign ways.
Mm.
But it's in essence the same energy. So that's what I would say to people, like, oh, I'm not murderous like that. I'm not, yeah, you might not be like that, but find the essence of that energy that you're reacting to out there. And I bet that we all have that in ourselves.
That's really well put. Yeah. And it speaks to the archetypal, or like these underlying patterns, and there are extremes, clear extremes that people like where the projections are a lot easier or a lot more visceral. People like Trump, that they really seem to ignite that in people because there's something there that people see as extreme. But get into the essence, I guess we're gonna fly around a little bit now, but this does lead me to symbolic thinking, because this idea of like the archetypal realm, seeing the essence of similar patterns of that we reject in the world, that we judge as other than ourselves, as an extension of that. Could you maybe talk to symbolic thinking versus what we, standard kind of cognition and literal thinking?
Yeah, sure. Well, in his work, Jung, in a letter he wrote, he goes, yeah, he's devoted his entire life to trying to implement symbolic awareness.
Mm.
And I just want to point out that symbols are the language of dreams. Okay. And symbols, they're different than a sign. A sign you can understand with your mind in a literal way, like one way, do not enter. That's a sign that has a very clear meaning. Symbols aren't like that. Symbols co-join opposites together, and in a way they're an emanation of something deeper in us that is still a mystery, that's unknown. But when we get into sort of resonance with a symbol and into alignment with what it's actually expressing, that symbol that's the emanation of something deeper will actually bring us to that deeper place. And the idea being, like in Buddhism, they talk about one of the words for enlightenment is Mahamudra. And Mahamudra has two translations. One is the great attitude, the other is the great symbol. And they're pointing at that this universe is a symbol of itself. It's pointing to itself. And what that means is that, to see the universe as an oracle, that it's continually speaking, that it's speaking dream speak. It's speaking symbolically. And so sometimes people will come to me and they'll have a particular issue, and I'll counsel them to watch their dreams. They'll come back and they're saying, yeah, I'm not having any dreams that are helping me with this issue. And meanwhile, they'll share with me what's going on in their lives. And it's like they're dreaming the solution. They're dreaming all the parts of the problem in and as and through their waking dream. And it's being, expressed to them symbolically, but they don't have the eyes to see that, So in a way, when Christ was saying in the Bible and in the Gospel of Thomas, the kingdom is spread all over, but people don't see it, he's pointing at symbolic awareness, that it's this organ of cognition that we need to cultivate to see symbolically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's profoundly important topic to bring up. Yeah.
Yeah, and also that, because I know you mentioned synchronicity already, and this is a big area of interest for you as well, and how that bridge, again, there can be disconnect. I know in my own experience, there can be disconnect from inquiring into the imaginal realm, inquiring into my inner world, and almost unintentionally disconnecting that from the outer world. And that can be the byproduct of a spiritual practice where you start looking within, maybe overemphasizing that, and you find symbols in dreams, and you see these processes as inner, overlooking that bridge of synchronicity and the almost what can be quite unsettling to have the experience of the waking dream and to sense that connection. And you mentioned the holistic universe, the way that these things come together, which is another crucial element of describing Wetiko. I wonder if, as an extension of that, how do you see, I'll just choose a direction to go. I know we can go in many directions, but that poetic, symbolic expression of the unconscious, how do you see that playing out? And we'll start with relationships. So in relationship and how people are interacting with each other.
Yeah. Well, I just want to take a step back and just say, because one way of describing Wetiko is that it's an inner disease of the soul that has this seemingly magical ability to extend itself out into the world and configure events in our lives, whether it's our relationships, our business dealings, or what's happening collectively on the world stage, in a way that reflects and expresses Wetiko. So it's an inner disease that somehow configures events in the outer world so as to reveal itself. That's very interesting, because that's the description of a dream. When the inner is the outer. And the main channel, really, that Wetiko operates is via relationships. And so imagine, particularly people you're really close with, your partner, your, family members. And where there's love, that's where the unconscious plays out the most. And, all of a sudden you're very, there's love, there's harmony, everything's, zen and chill and all good. And then boom, something happens. There's a misunderstanding and there's separation and there's potential hurt. And it can even break up the friendship. It can break up the family. And one way of conceiving of that is that, that Wetiko behind the scenes is feasting on the separation and the misunderstanding, because we all project. And what'll happen, you say if I have an unconscious wound or a trauma that I haven't healed, well, what's going to happen? I'm going to unconsciously, being that this is like a dream, I'm going to dream up my unconscious, unhealed, unintegrated process in my life, typically via my relationships, right? And then what'll happen, and all of this is unconscious, I'm not aware I'm doing it, but then I'll somebody will get conjured up to play a certain, say, negative role. And then as soon as they manifest that way, I'll concretize them, because unconsciously I'm scanning the environment because I need someone to play this, sort of negative role for me to actually enact my trauma so as to unlock it. But the enactment of the trauma, the repetition compulsion, that is the pathology of the trauma. But the idea is that somebody plays out that negative role, I then solidify them. And by solidifying them and seeing them through that lens, where they're embodying that negative role, I'm making it more likely. I'm not causing them in a linear way, but I'm making it more probable that they will step into that negative role, which confirms to me that is who they are. And now all of a sudden they're an adversary. And they're probably doing the same thing to me. You know, that's the transference, countertransference phenomena. And you know, the idea being that if, you know, there's no consciousness added to that process, it'll break up the relationship. But the point is that hidden within that process is the medicine. That's like hidden within the repetition compulsion of trauma, which is the pathology. The person is trying to actually consciously experience something so as to liberate it and integrate it. And that's, you know, very much a helpful way of understanding Wetiko, that it's a collective psychosis. It's the source of all the evil and the insanity in the world. And encoded within it is medicine, is a revelation. It's actually helping us. If Wetiko didn't exist, we would have to invent it. It's catalyzing us to evolve, to awaken. But if we don't recognize that, well, then it'll just assume its program function of killing us. So I don't even know if I answered your question, but that's kind of what came out. Yeah.
No, you did. And it links back to at the beginning when, you know, you mentioned that reality is informing us. That it can be a bit of a cliche, but it is a learning experience. And to just assume that mindset that there's actually no real coincidence in the things that are manifesting in our lives, and not to be hyper vigilant around that and to try and find meaning everywhere, but just to see that if there are patterns, again, something I find really interesting is how in conventional material, ways that pathologize mental illness, for example, there's a way that seeing patterns has somehow been stigmatized. There's that phrase, I think it's apophenia, which links to schizophrenia, and like the way that people find meaning in just meaningless noise. And the same with the term patternicity. It's seen as a desperate attempt to join dots that aren't there. And there is truth in that. I think the mind can create those dots. But at the same time, there's a underlying, and again, archetypal patterning of our lives that does reflect that, right? It's showing us the way that you describe it.
A lot. I mean, I coined the term OSS, over-synchronicity stimulation.
Yeah.
And that idea of overdoing it, of seeing synchronicity everywhere, we know that's out of balance. And you're right, people who've typically been diagnosed mentally ill, and I'm one of them. When I had my whole awakening in 1981, and it was based on being the recipient of this incredible abuse, you know, from my father, who was taken over by a Wetiko, and being the only child, I was the recipient of that. It activated, I had like a life transforming spiritual awakening, the early stages of which, I mean, within 24 hours, I was so ecstatic at what I was realizing that I immediately got thrown in hospitals and diagnosed and medicated. And I was seeing the symbolic dimension of reality. But I was 24. There was no way I could have possibly have integrated it. And so I was so excited that, the powers that be just right away pathologized me, and, he's seeing patterns, he's mentally ill, he's chemically imbalanced, he'll need to be on medication the rest of his life. And, but I was fortunate in that it was made so clear to me inside my own mind that I was awakening, that I never for a moment bought into their diagnosis. But you're totally right. People who see those patterns, it can be out of balance and overdone, but there's a very good chance they're actually seeing they've snapped out of the scientific materialist spell of linear causality, and they're actually more connecting with the atemporal, acausal, synchronistic matrix that's informing and giving shape to everything that happens each and every moment. And it's a destabilizing, insight first until you actually integrate it. And but it's tragic because there are people who have identified with the pathology and the diagnosis and are on medication and maybe backwards of psychiatry, who are potential shamans in, in training,
Mm-hmm.
who are actually getting called to step out of just their limited sense of self and connect with their true nature and become like, because the shaman is the wounded healer, the shaman is the dreamer, the shaman is the creative artist, and I point out that it's the creative artists who are going to be the ones who heal this world. And that's all of us. And that segues back to the profound importance for us to be creative. Because
Yeah.
if we're not accessing our own creativity consciously, then the powers that be, whether in our minds or out in the world, are more than happy to usurp our own creative powers and turn it against us. And I guess one final thing, the greatest protection against Wetiko is, to connect with our true nature, to remember who we are. Great, but what does that even mean? That's such a cliche. And I point out, well, what is our nature? Our nature, by its very nature, is creative. So when we have realization of our nature, we embody and express ourselves creatively. And by doing that, we deepen the realization of our nature in a positive feedback loop. And that creates light, instead of darkness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also really like the term of like relinquishing projection. There's this idea of bringing in the awareness, bringing in the light, connecting to that true nature or the higher self, however you want to describe it, the ultimate dreamer of our reality and ourselves is able to discern. I guess that self-connection is so important, and radical self-honesty as well. Like you're saying, Wetiko is a form of blindness. So there's a form of self-deception in that, and radical self-honesty is a huge antidote.
Yeah. In a way, some traditions, like the Hawaiian Kahuna tradition, they'll talk about Wetiko in different words, but they'll call it like this mind deceiver, and and what it does, it inspires us, it tricks us because it's a trickster. It tricks us out of our right mind, in which we pull the wool over our own eyes. In a way, we then are colluding in creating black magic on ourselves. And it makes me think of, in his work, Jung talks about the sickness of our age, and he calls it a sickness of disassociation. That everybody's like talking about the polarization in the world. Well, that's a reflection of the polarization in ourselves, and that this disassociation that Jung is pointing at, he actually says it's like one hand, the right hand does not know what the left hand is doing, and and then when we get into denial and we then deny that we're in denial, that becomes a self-generating feedback loop, with no exit strategy, So the idea of to really be honest has to do with to look in the mirror. And etymologically, the word mirror, it literally means the holder of the shadow. And there again, we circle back to the importance of seeing our own potential for darkness. And then it brings me back to Jung, where he says the best way to deal with the darkness in the outer world is to become familiar with your own inner darkness. Because if you're not, then you're just going to be projecting out your inner darkness out there and reacting to your projection and unwittingly adding and feeding the darkness.
Within that process and that awareness, how would you discern over responsibility, as in taking too much responsibility? Because there's this paradox, right? And you talk about I don't remember the phrase, but this type of non-linear thinking from Buddhism. You mentioned that in the book. Paradoxical thinking.
Yeah, it's four-valued logic, but also interdependent co-origination. Dependent co-arising is another name for it. But it's four-valued logic instead of two-valued logic, where instead of things being true or false, they're both true and false simultaneous.
Yeah, I think this is super important because you mentioned about the holistic universe and these paradoxical truths that there is no form of separation, and at the same time there is separation, and being able to hold both. And I
Yeah, yeah,
wonder, in that same line of thinking, how do you discern, wow, I'm contributing to what I see in my reality, and there's an element of responsibility over my shadow, and being able to point at evil or point at wrongdoing as an
yeah,
objective phenomenon, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, totally. Well, it makes me think of people who've told me, oh, I have these dreams and I lucid dreams, and then I control the whole dream. And right away, that tells me they're not having a lucid dream, because if you're in a dream and you recognize the nature of your circumstance, that is that you're dreaming, why in the world would you want to control it? No, you would just flow with it. But what you would be in control of is yourself and your reactions. So yeah, it's an expression of inflation, where instead of, going back to Jung, his whole thing was trying to introduce people to the self, the God within, and cultivating a relationship. He called it the ego self axis, and like developing an inner relationship with our inner guide and inner guidance system and intuition, and muse and genius and daimon. There are a lot of names for it, but the idea is that you're in a relationship to it. But when people have an experience of the higher self within, and they immediately like absorb into it and identify with it, that's the inflation. They think, oh, I'm creating everything, and then they're out of balance, and unwittingly they've offered themselves into the hands of Wetiko by doing that. That's why, like with my teachers, I'm really fortunate in having these genuinely, amazing teachers from different, from Tibet and Burma, and who I've known. They're like family members, and they're genuine. They have realization. They're genuinely realized beings, and they're incredibly humble. There's no sense of this inflation that I'm pointing at, but I want to just pick up the other voice too, because, the spell, because it's like our planet is under a spell and the human species is under a spell, like in a fairy tale. And then when you have the recognition of that, it's like, well, how do, okay, I'm waking up from the spell to whatever degree, because we're all a work in process, and, but then the question is, okay, how do I intervene in the waking dream, to help other people to awaken spell? Because people don't even know they're under a spell. They're so propagandized and mind controlled by, what's going on in the world today. And, so that really, is for me like a profound, it's almost like that's the question. And I'm doing it in my own way by writing these books and presenting the idea of a mind virus. And the mind virus is basically predicated on the realization that we're having a collective dream. Right now, we're all dreaming up, like Wetiko is a dreamed up phenomena. And, each and every moment, and this is what quantum physics has proven, each and every moment we are dreaming up our universe into materialization, and we're doing it unconsciously, based on our programming, based on our conditioning, based on our woundedness. And one way of understanding this that I think would be helpful, once again, to invoke the creative imagination and imagine being in a dream, and imagine you're in a night dream, and you, the dream ego that's you, actually has lucidity and wakes up and realizes, oh my God, I'm having a dream. And imagine if the other characters in the dream, if they start also awakening, because they're just parts of yourself, right? And then you hang out together and you share your realization. Oh my God, we're all realizing that this dream universe we're in is manifesting in such a nightmarish way, because we've been all conditioned and programmed to dream it out of our own identifying with Wetiko's version of ourselves, that we're limited and wounded and traumatized, and that we exist. Because the essence of Wetiko is thinking you exist in a way that you do not, thinking you exist as a separate self. As soon as I imagine I exist as a separate self, you're an other. As soon as there's an other, there's fear. And fear is the superfood for Wetiko. So getting back to this imagination, imagine a group of people having this lucid experience together, coming together and tripping out over what they've realized. Oh my God, where this dream universe we're in is manifesting in such a problematic way because we've been programmed and conditioned and trained to dream it that way. Part of the realization, I imagine, is they can realize, wait a second, we can put what I call our sacred power of dreaming, which is the part of us that dreams this dream, waking dream into materialization each and every moment. We can get in sync with each other and we can dream a different dream. And that's totally easy to understand when you contemplate a night dream and imagine that happening. That is our situation in the waking dream. Okay. What I'm describing is the realization that any one of us can actually consciously step into and participate in our own evolution. And it's, it's one thing for one person to wake up and have realization and to have the dreamlike nature, or seeing their shadow, or seeing Wetiko, or being creative, or having compassion. All of these are different aspects of the jewel of realization. But it's quite another thing when you come together with other people who are also having realization. That's the mystical body of Christ. That's the Sangha of the Buddha. And I easily imagine when that happens, we can discover that we can activate our collective genius in a way that none of us can in isolation. Okay. And one other thing I just want to say that I forgot to say before about, in essence, Wetiko is identifying with a separate self. Okay. Quantum physics has shown that there's nothing objective, that the act of observing the universe influences the universe, that we never experience the universe without awareness being part of the equation. Okay. What that means is when you see that this universe does not exist objectively, what happened to you as a subject? Because I can only be a subject if I'm in relation to an object. If there's no objective universe and no objective anything, who am I? What happened to me as a subject? So the imagination of existing and in a way that I do not as a separate self, and the imagination of thinking the world exists subjectively, reciprocally reinforce each other and co-arise. That's the illusion generating illusion. That's David Bohm's phrase. And seeing through that, that's where you're beginning to connect with the truth of who we are.
Yeah, and this speaks to widely, and I really like that parallel, just widely the use of that term awakening and why it just sticks, like the idea of a spiritual awakening, the idea of leaving the matrix behind, right, waking up in a multitude of ways. It implies that there's a different dimension to reality. There's a different way of being once you exit that hypnosis. I want to segue from that into, and I think it's just so important. It is so crucially important. The understanding, there's the sense of Wetiko operating in the shadow, from our own complexes, from our own psychology and wounding. There also is clearly within the world a sense of power over. And there's a way in which this hypnosis is, it seems, deliberately and intelligently propagated by mass media, fear-mongering messaging, a way of really keeping people under the spell, and a way of really fueling separation. And we can go into it to whatever degree you feel comfortable, but for me, a big part of my awakening to the darkness, and this followed like more of a light, you mentioned the ecstasy of awakening. My awakening to the darkness was COVID, and the gradual sober realization of the lock and step of how much this sense of psychological warfare was being carried out. And they're loaded terms, and I appreciate some people may be on board with that, some others might not. But this has even been admitted by this point. Like the Canadian government were using psychological warfare on their citizens. It was the same in the UK. We had a nudge unit that were, through the use of technology and propaganda, controlling people's minds. Yeah. I wonder how you view that in the context of Wetiko.
Yeah,
and I've also
go ahead.
I
love that you're asking that, because so many people I know, through the occasion of COVID actually, kind of saw through the
Mm,
propaganda. And then there are lots of people I know, good friends of mine, who were like, really afraid for me because I didn't get vaccinated and I wasn't going to get vaccinated. And they were like, oh, we're so concerned for you, and all that. And, a number of years ago, I had written an article. The title is called The War on Consciousness. And it's really about this,
mhm.
that the real war is a war on our minds. And, whether it's the powers that be who want to centralize power and control, and it's not just like national, it's a globalist organization, in a way that wants to turn all of us, into its minions and into slaves. And I've been studying this for decades, and I'm absolutely 100% convinced that it's true. And I want to just point out, even if we figured out who these people are and took them out of their positions of power, it wouldn't do any good because, they're just getting cast in roles. It's the deeper archetypal pattern that's playing out that over time, other people would just play those dark roles. The idea is there's something in us, in the archetypal transpersonal dimension of our being, that we need to shed light on. And so, what also happens, you see, one of the qualities when Wetiko is around is that it's not safe to speak. Because if you speak your experience or you speak the truth of what you're seeing, you'll get censored, you'll get demonetized, you can even get killed.
Yeah.
And I've had to navigate that because I have a platform, and I don't know, as to a lot of us. But here's what happens. So out in the world, there's, the mind control, and keep in mind, this is the most, highly developed mind control technology there's ever been in the history of the world. And it's totally being used on our own citizens, whatever country. And so many people aren't even aware. They just read the New York Times and think, oh, this is what's true. It's in the Times. And if it wasn't in the Times, well, it couldn't be true. And it just blows my mind. But the point that I'm trying to make is that then that mind control becomes internalized. Just like when there's abuse. When there's a historical abuse, the abuser exits stage left. And what makes abuse is that when the abuser exits stage left, we internalize the abuse and we start enacting it and doing it to ourselves. Then there's no need for an external abuser. We become our own control system. And that process gets rendered into the unconscious. And then, we keep ourselves in place. And I've seen that in so many people, myself included, and so that's what really, the idea of critical thinking, of having discernment, that's one of the most profound superhero powers that we need to develop right now. Because it's tragic. Yeah, there are a lot of people who are waking up to the propaganda and mind control, but unfortunately, there are also a lot of people who aren't. And I notice I've had to figure out, each of my friends who are under the spell, there's like these don't go there zones. Oh, this person, I bet I'm not met with Ukraine. This one, Putin, this one, Trump, this one, vaccine, this one, Israel. Each one, it's a different context. And we've never had to develop like a superhero power like this,
Yeah.
And because I've learned if I speak my experience to a person who's not, open to that, they're going to feel threatened. They could end the relationship. They could get angry. They could attack me, whatever. It's never been like this before,
Yeah. And that I think for me was the most disconcerting aspect. It was how much to see how technological evolution was served to carry out that form of tyranny. And I'm putting aside, I'm not, there's still discernment around the health risks and all that relevant, like you say, critical thinking, not just jump into one side, but the use of technology to further a message instantaneously, and the direction that we're moving in is like the level of consciousness that is in power with that technology at use. It was at one point, nuclear, the atomic bomb. That was like one threat. And now I think we have to see the technology we have in our phones, in our consumption of information, as a modern day atomic bomb for that mind control.
Totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it really is like I've written this recent article. I think it's up on my website. I think it's called Invasion of the Body Snatchers
Yeah.
Comes to Life. You
Yeah.
know, because what happens, people who fall under the mind control and are propagandized, they unwittingly become they just parrot the algorithm, and
Mm.
they think they're in possession of the truth because they read an article or listened to a podcast, and they haven't done any of their own research. They've just gotten hooked by somebody they think of as being smart who has an opinion, and they've taken on the other person's opinion, and then there's no talking to them. It's like they are there, and this ties into one of you see the thing about Wetiko. There are a couple of qualities. One is we typically, when we're under its spell, we accuse people of doing what we're unconsciously doing.
Mm.
And another one is that say I have a conscious intention of wanting a certain outcome. When I'm under the spell of Wetiko, my actions will unconsciously create the very opposite of what I want. And a perfect example, think about the US's policy. Its number one priority was to make Russia and China absolutely keep them separate. And by the way the US has played out their role in the Ukraine war, it's like sped up and guaranteed how Russia and China are real buddies.
Yeah.
They've created, and that's just showing how what I'm describing as Wetiko, it plays out both individually, in people and in their relationships, but also globally with nations.
Mm. I know you mentioned as well, Jung's totalitarian psychosis is very aligned to this way of thinking. And I'm going to bridge, I'm aware we don't have so much time, but I just wanted to bring something else in, which I found was really useful in your book, Undreaming Wetiko. And you've spoken about, connection to the self. We've mentioned self-deceit and self-honesty. And in terms of overcoming Wetiko, there can be an overlooked utility and value in concepts. And I know if people have a meditation practice, there's a lot of work on unlearning, and part of not being under the mind control is just witnessing your own mind and the stories it's weaving and not taking them necessarily as true. Equally, the power of the concept, and it's almost like this mind control is a collective inception where ideas are planted in multiple minds through the media. And equally, there can be, in my experience, concepts or insights that the likes of which your book really, talks to lucidly, that have the opposite effect, that wake people up. And you mentioned this, I don't know if I'm going to paraphrase, but there was a description of seeing, was it the face in the moon? And how from that point on, it was a story that someone shared around seeing a face in the moon. And as soon as they were told that, they could never unsee it.
Yeah. This is a modern day quantum physicist, Christopher Fuchs, who told a story that he was in Japan, and they don't see, the man in the moon, a face of a person. They see this rabbit pounding rice cakes.
Yeah, that was it.
And then he, then he began seeing that.
Yeah.
And, but the idea being, well, what is objectively there in the same way that is it, the face in the moon, the man in the moon, or the rabbit pounding rice cakes? Well, it depends on the observer. In the same way, it's interesting. I was just sharing this, way back in the day, I used to paint and draw a lot, where now my creative outlet is more writing. And I remember there was a painting where I put this gray color down. It was definitely gray. And then as the painting evolved, there was blue next to it. And I looked at the gray and it was purple. It wasn't gray anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And then I began to contemplate, wow, well, what is the objective color? Was it gray or is it purple? And it's just showing, there's no objective anything, because it's like my mind interacting with this seeming external world is creating this inner experience, be it gray or purple. And the idea of asking, well, what is objectively the color? That is a nonsensical question.
Mm.
And you see, so this is where, like that story of the moon, it's showing that we are actually potentially getting entranced by our own projections onto the waking inkblot. And, and in quantum physics, the main projection, we inherited this unexamined idea that this universe and ourselves exists in a way that we don't. We've taken on the unexamined assumption that this universe exists objectively, and we've taken on the unexamined presumption that we exist as a separate self. Those two assumptions, like I've been saying, they reciprocally self-generate and reinforce each other. And that's the real, to see the dreamlike nature, to see through the projective tendencies of the mind, then all of a sudden those projections really dissipate and you begin to see, the deeper reality that we're actually a part of and that we're actually participating in conjuring up, and that's what this is all about. When sufficient number of us actually plug in with each other, and based on that realization, that's where we can, in a real way, we can change the waking dream we're having, and that's not just new age woo-woo stuff. That's actually what's available to us. And if we don't have this realization, I'm convinced then we're doomed.
Mm-hmm. It's that double-edged sword, isn't it? It's the awakening to seeing that dreamlike nature, seeing the way we're contributing to the darkness, and then also the responsibility that we do have. We have a responsibility to dream up a more hopeful future. And it's something.
There's no one out there, who's going to do. People who think, oh, God's going to come and save us, or extraterrestrials are going to come and save us. I think there's a great theology scholar who was a 9/11 activist, David Ray Griffin, and he points out, he goes, that's just, that's insane logic to think, oh, Big Daddy God is going to come and save us. No, God invested his or her creatures with our own, creative power. And there's no one, it's up to us to have the recognition, I would say, in my words, to have the recognition of what's being revealed to us. Wetiko is a revelation. Like I joke with my friends, if I had a marketing department, they couldn't do a better job publicizing my work than what's playing out in the world.
Yeah.
And, and it's so crazy for me because, I'm just a translator. I'm not anybody special. I haven't discovered anything. No, I'm just translating this indigenous wisdom, not just Native American, but every spiritual tradition. And visionary theorist and artist, Philip K. Dick, was completely switched on to Wetiko. He called it the Black Iron Prison. And he said it's this mimicking stuff. And remember, Wetiko is a mastermind. It impersonates us. Philip K. Dick says, in this mimicking stuff is the key to everything. Okay. In the Castaneda books, Don Juan, Carlos's teacher, doesn't have the name Wetiko. He calls it, I think, the predator. He goes, this is the topic of topics. There's nothing more important than Wetiko, in the sense that if we don't have the realization of what Wetiko is revealing to us, there won't be a world. We won't exist, And so here I am, like this lone voice in the wilderness, trying to get this out. And the only reason that I have the authority to say this and to write my books is because I had a direct, unmediated encounter with Wetiko in my family through my father, and it destroyed my entire family. And the overwhelming trauma of that forced me so deeply inwards, really an encounter with people that, I've been able to sort of alchemically transmute that darkness into light. And that's the calling for all of us, and every wisdom traditions talks about, it's an archetypal idea that hidden in the darkness is the real light. And that's in essence what I'm talking about.
Well, that's a great point for us to draw the conversation to a close. It's been so much fun. I appreciate so much, your courage in exploring this and translating and articulating Wetiko. Like, this book was a real lighthouse for me, and it really did put words to a lot of things that helped me understand, on a deeper level. So it's a real service that you're doing, and thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today as well.
Yeah, I so appreciate it. Wow, really, thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Mind That Ego podcast. To stay up to date, You can join the Mind That Ego mailing list if you head to mindthatego.com/MFM. You'll also get a copy of my book, Mindsets for Mindfulness, when you join. You can also follow Mind That Ego on Facebook and YouTube, where the podcasts are also displayed in video format along with other inspired videos that I create. Or if Instagram is more your social media of choice, you can follow me at Ricky_Deriz. That's DERISZ.